A huge warm welcome, art lovers, to Art Gallery Explorer. This is the vlog that takes you inside galleries and exhibition spaces across London, the southeast of England and beyond. We review the show having had a little explore inside, and I decide whether I recommend it's worth you visiting or not. And today we're here at the National Portrait Gallery just behind Trafalgar Square to explore the much anticipated show, 6 Lives, the stories of Henry VIII's queens. Henry VIII plays a dominant role in Tudor history and casts a long shadow over our nation. And he was obviously very famous for marrying 6 times. There's a musical down the road actually on the Strand called Six, where each of his queens are given a solo voice. And I'm really hoping that this exhibition gives that individual voice to each of the 6 of his wives. I imagine, being the National Portrait Gallery, it's going to combine portraits and other paintings and drawings with some other documentation, and I'm intrigued. I know a lot about Tudor history. I studied it a lot, and so for me the bar is set high. I'm sure lots of you will be thinking about visiting this exhibition, so come inside and take a sneak peek. And if you want to skip the actual show, if you want to leave it as a surprise, then do use the chapters to go straight to my review. Come on, let's go. With this exhibition, once you've admired the magnificent portrait of Henry VIII and digested the introductory information, I would actually skip the afterlife section and come back to that at the end and head straight to the room entitled Women at the Tudor Court, where the exhibition begins in earnest. This room is very much an aperitif, which reminds us how central women were to the Tudor court of Henry VIII. It uses the inventory of possessions taken at Henry VIII's death to give us a sense of the role of women in the court. For example, in this magnificent tapestry here, we see 2 paintings which kind of match descriptions of those listed in the inventory and owned by Henry, although provenance of some of these is hazy. The show really gets going when we see some portrayals of real Tudor courtiers by Hans Holbein the Younger. Holbein first came to England from Switzerland, although he was born in Germany in 1526, and returned to Basel before coming to England again in 1532. And by 1535 he was the king's painter to Henry VIII. He worked in a Northern Renaissance style, and his hand is seen throughout this exhibition. He's undoubtedly the most important painter in the early Tudor period under Henry VIII, as Britain belatedly began to embrace the Renaissance. The wonderful core of the exhibition gives each of Henry's 6 queens their own chapel-like space, which has as its centrepiece a portrait, and it's surrounded by other portraits of significant people in their reigns, as well as documentation and artefacts. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, was 5 years older than Henry. She was the daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, who you can see here, the royal powerhouse which united Spain, setting it on the path to becoming a global superpower. The pair also lauded for reconquering the territory of Granada, the last Muslim territory in Europe. Catherine was due to marry Henry's elder brother Arthur, who you can see here, a coup of marriage for the Tudors, and after negotiations she arrived in England in 1501. Arthur, however, died a few months into their marriage. Henry, who you can see here, had actually escorted Catherine to his brother's wedding in 1501 when he was 10. Catherine claimed the marriage was never consummated, and after Arthur's death, the Pope gave permission for Henry and Catherine to marry, and he agreed, marrying when he was 18 and Catherine was 23. James IV of Scotland had married Henry's sister Margaret, but in 1513 he attacked England from the north while Henry was on campaign in France, as part of a long-standing agreement between France and Scotland called the Old Alliance. Catherine was governor of the realm while Henry was away, showing the prestige she was bequeathed as queen, and she was leading reserve forces north when James was killed in battle. Henry became increasingly preoccupied by securing his royal lineage by having a son. Catherine gave birth to 1 child who lived beyond infancy, Princess Mary, who you can see here, and she hoped to arrange the marriage of Princess Mary to the Emperor Charles V, who you can see here. Henry became increasingly agitated as her son failed to materialize and began to question the legitimacy of the papal dispensation that had allowed his marriage to go ahead. He tasked Cardinal Wolsey, who you can see here, his closest advisor, with seeking an annulment to the marriage, but Wolsey failed, and in 1534 Pope Clement ruled in favour of Catherine. Supporters of Catherine, such as John Fisher, who refused to renounce the doctrine of papal supremacy, were executed. This seismic moment in our history ushered in the English Reformation and the break with Rome and the break with the papacy. And hovering in the background was someone who would refuse to become Henry's mistress and waited for 7 years to become his wife. And this person was Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn had already caught Henry's eye, but because their marriage lasted only 3 years, little survives of her artistically. There's only one image in the exhibition, this medal, which is actually taken from her life. Anne was a highly educated woman. She'd actually been educated at the court of Margaret of Austria, who you can see here, where she became fluent in French. And she was also very interested in the modern religious ideas of people like Margaret de Angoulême, who was a religious reformer. Europe was awash with Lutheran Protestantism, and the Catholic Church appeared under siege, and Anne was certainly sympathetic to reformers. This was a turbulent time, and Anne's religious beliefs were not universally accepted or popular. Thomas More, for example, ex-Lord Chancellor, questioned the validity of Anne's marriage to Henry, refusing to attend Henry and Anne's coronation. He was executed. Anne gave birth to one daughter, Elizabeth, and pressure grew when she failed, like Catherine before her, to produce the son that Henry so desperately wanted. Thomas Cromwell, the man who'd encouraged the marriage in the first place and be one of its architects, turned against Anne, seeing her as a barrier to a renewed alliance with Charles V. Anne attacked Cromwell in 1536, and Cromwell allied with conservative Nicholas Carew, who you can see here, against Anne. He concocted, we think, stories of adultery, including with Wyatt, who you can see here, although he was never executed, unlike the others, and these sealed Anne's fate. She was arrested and taken to the Tower of London on the 2nd of May, 1536. And on the 18th of May, 1536, as is shown in this artifact, she was executed, leaving behind Henry, who began to search for another wife who could give him that much needed male heir. Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, is a fleeting presence in the history of the art of the country, because she married Henry in 1536, but died a year later, soon after giving birth in 1537. And so there's very little portraiture, for example, that was actually produced in her lifetime. However, unlike Anne Boleyn, who was a person non grata in the history of the Tudors and was kind of wiped from history a little bit in Henry VIII's reign, Jane Seymour, despite her very short reign as queen, was obviously lauded and heightened within Tudor mythology. Her courtship to Henry was facilitated by her brother Edward Seymour, who you can possibly see here, and she was unique amongst Henry's queens in the sense that she was able to bequeath him what Henry desired more than anything else, and that was a son. You see a copy of one of the great lost works of English art, the Whitehall mural, where we see Henry, Jane, and Prince Edward solidifying the Tudor dynasty. And one of the wonderful things about the exhibition is that, along with portraiture, there are many other documents and artifacts which bring the period alive and give you a 360-degree sense of the changes that were happening in the reigns of the monarchs as well as them themselves. This great Bible, for example, is the first Bible ever to be approved in English. Another highlight is the miniatures, which are a key part of Tudor art. These miniatures were produced as kind of keepsakes, as portable works of art. And there is an incredibly rich selection here, which have been borrowed from all over the UK. And all of the artifacts and connections certainly brought me closer to the Queens and gave them their uniqueness. Henry's fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, was a geostrategic marriage organised and arranged by Thomas Cromwell. Britain had become increasingly diplomatically isolated in Europe as a result of its break from Rome. And Wilhelm the Fifth of Cleves was proposed as a useful ally in the area that we today call Germany, but at the time was part of the Holy Roman Empire. Unfortunately for Thomas Cromwell, who you can see here in this unique piece by Hans Holbein, the marriage was a disaster and art played a key piece. This portrait, which you can see here, was widely derided in England. It was infamously this portrait by Hans Holbein, who was dispatched to paint Anne of Cleves, that Henry saw when it was brought back to London and persuaded him that she was somebody he would like to marry. She's obviously portrayed as being very beautiful here, and apparently the portrait was not attuned to reality. Christina of Denmark was another potential suitor for Henry, but that never came off. And there was great excitement as Anne of Cleves travelled from her own home to London. These maps show her projected passage to England. Apparently, she was stuck in Calais for a few days and played cards. But she was because of bad weather. But the problem with Anne of Cleves was that she was not a cosmopolitan or highly educated woman, along with her sister, who you can see here. She led a sheltered life. And when Henry came to Kent to meet Anne of Cleves, it's fair to say that their first meeting was just disastrous. Henry actually met Anne in disguise, expecting her to recognize him as king, and she didn't, and things sort of didn't get much better from there. So although they married very soon, their marriage was annulled, as you can see from this document. And Anne of Cleves survived and was given a very generous divorce settlement, and apparently became well regarded for the dignity with which she handled a very undignified situation. Henry's fifth wife, Catherine Howard, is again a fleeting presence in British art history, partly because of the way that she fell from her position as queen. There are two miniatures that could be of her, including this one, but our historians have disputed whether they really are her. She's an interesting queen because she was an aristocrat. Her uncle was the incredibly powerful Duke of Norfolk from that great Catholic family. But her father was never well off, having been the third son in a system of primogeniture when the money and wealth of a state was passed down to the first person. It was thanks to the Duke of Norfolk that Catherine Howard achieved a place at court as a lady in waiting for the new Queen Anne of Cleves. And it was here, as an attractive young lady in waiting, that she piqued the interest and gained the attention of Henry VIII. They began a flirtation, which led to marriage a mere 19 days after Anne of Cleves' marriage to Henry had been annulled. And at this time, Catherine Howard was merely 17, whereas Henry VIII was 49. Rumours quickly began to spread about Catherine Howard's previous sexual relationships, and these rumours and gossip reached the ears of Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who discreetly alerted Henry VIII. And it was down to him to interview Catherine and other members of the accused. And Catherine was found guilty and executed on the 10th of February 1542. Catherine Parr was the final of Henry's queens, and they married on the 12th of July 1543. She's a really interesting character, highly intelligent, a linguist, and she wrote three books, two of which were written in her name and were the first books to be published by an English queen in their name. Interestingly, she'd actually wished to marry Thomas Seymour and had started a romantic friendship with him at court, where she was installed in Mary, Catherine of Aragon's daughter's household. But when the king noticed her, she felt it was her duty to give up her desire to marry Thomas Seymour and to do her duty to the country by marrying King Henry VIII. And interestingly, Thomas Seymour was sent to Brussels to kind of get him out of the way at court. You can see him here. And she had to make that sacrifice for her own for national happiness. One of her really important roles was that she developed a close relationship with all three of Henry's children, Princess Mary, Princess Elizabeth, and Prince Edward. And she was actually key in restoring both Mary and Elizabeth to the line of succession after Edward, who you can see here. And it's really, interesting to think how different history would be if she hadn't made that decision. The great Elizabethan age, especially, that we enjoyed at the end of the 16th century, would be much, much harder to achieve. Catherine Parr was religious and sympathetic to the Protestant faith, or a more reformist faith, and this put her at odds with more Catholic leaning religious figures like Stephen Gardiner, who you can see here. And in fact, there was a mini plot to try and accuse Catherine Parr of heresy, but she was able to reconcile with the with the king by feigning illness, apparently, and he coming to her bedside, where she begged forgiveness for holding heretical books. And I think this exhibition does a really good job of bringing all six women to life above the looming figure that you can see here of Henry VIII. The final, and in my opinion least successful section of the exhibition, is entitled Afterlives, and it looks at the huge influence that Henry VIII and his six wives have had on British culture from very soon after Henry VIII's death in 1547 through to the modern day. And we see a selection of works and costumes from different works of art, films, photography that have been inspired by the six wives and by this epic story that you've just seen. reminded of the huge commercial power of the Tudors, and especially the early Tudors and Henry VIII and his reign, which continues to make money to this day. Well, I hope you enjoyed the walkthrough there, and I hope I brought alive the storytelling element of 6 Lives, the stories of Henry VIII's queens from the National Portrait Gallery. I really enjoyed that storytelling element, actually, and I'll come more to that in the main review. But I did really enjoy the exhibition. It was the start. I love the sense of it being the start of our Renaissance with Hans Holbein the Younger. Britain came to the Renaissance later, much later than Italy. Or the Low Countries, and so it was really fascinating to see the art which started a new wave of British art in our own period in the early 16th century. I always review these shows in terms of the good, the bad, and the beautiful, and then sum up by saying whether I think this is a worthwhile show to visit or not. And if we start with the good, it was the curation of those 6 main rooms with the little women at the Tudor court aperitif. It was just beautifully presented. I love the way that each queen was afforded a kind of standalone space, which felt, as I said in the walkthrough, almost chapel-like. And I really like the combination of paintings with other documentation and objects to bring each queen's story to life, with the lurking figure of Henry VIII in the background. It was really special to see as many of these Tudor works brought together from quite a range of places, mainly UK, but a few from overseas as well, in one place. It meant it was one of the richest narrative storytelling art exhibitions, art/history exhibitions that I've seen for quite a long time. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. In terms of the bad, there was a mini gripe. I'd loved it if they could have got a couple more paintings over, the curators, especially the Thomas More painting from the Frick collection, but that's being greedy, really. That's hard to get across, and it's obviously much in demand for lots of different types of show. The one bit of the show I didn't enjoy as much was the afterlife section. I like the premise of it, the idea that these queens and the reign of Henry VIII have lasted for and influenced different art forms for the centuries since. But for me, it was kind of felt sparse and incomplete compared to the richness of the core show, and it sort of felt a little bit as if it had been cobbled together as an afterthought, the afterlife. There were gaps, which I thought, and it wasn't that cohesive. You were looking at Sugimoto paintings, a few costumes from a show on the subject. It didn't hold together as much, and I didn't like the fact that it's obviously done through the nature of the National Gallery's layout, that you kind of come to this first, so do walk through that and then come back to it. In terms of the so that sort of turned me off a little bit. In terms of the beautiful, it has to be this miniature by Hans Holbein the Younger of Anne of Cleves. It was a portrait that caused trouble, diplomatic stress. It cost Henry VIII a lot of money in terms of a very generous divorce settlement, and I loved it because it's a beautiful little portrait, and also it reminds us of the importance of power and the power of art in the pre-photography age, as a practical as well as aesthetic means of finding out about people and other countries and other lands. So I love this portrait. It's beautiful. It's really nice to see it again. Overall, I give this show an 8 out of 10. I think if you're interested in history and art, and interested in discovering some of our earlier works of art, then it's a must-see. It's really that core bit which will leave you with lots of memories, and I think it will stick with me. It was just so well curated, that bit, the flow. None of the rooms were too big or too small, so I really enjoyed it, and I thought the curators did a good job of filling in the gaps, because some of these queens were obviously scrubbed from history, so there wasn't much art produced about them. So I really enjoyed that. The exhibition's on until the 8th of September. I think that £21 or £23.50 with a donation is good value for a really rich show. If you pace yourself, you'll be in there for well over an hour. So do get down to the Portrait Gallery if that appeals. Don't forget to subscribe to Art Gallery Explorer. I've been a bit sparse with my vlogs for various reasons, but I'm going to try and get them up and running much more regularly, trying to get back into a midweek, either Wednesday or Thursday, and then weekend run, because there's lots of shows in London as well as elsewhere that I want to bring you, which I haven't been to yet. So do stay tuned and do subscribe. As always, thank you very much if you comment on the videos and share your love of art and your opinions, and also thank you very much for watching.